You're going to talk, so I'm stepping out of the way. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So first thing I want to say is I really need to talk to the organizers because they put me right after Paul Asadurian, and I just don't know what to do. And if this is half as good, I'd be thrilled. So just to give a little bit of a background, why am I here? Why I will be talking about what we will be talking about? I work for CyberArk Software. We're a local information security company. We specialize in the privileged identity management. We kind of came up with the market. And there is a lot of stuff here on the slide about the company. The most important thing is we are hiring. That thing kind of also helps. All right. So let me know if anybody is looking for a job.
I can't hear you over here.
All right, I'll try to speak a little bit louder. Awesome. So, and I wanted to ask before I begin, who is here familiar with the concept of a privileged account and privileged account security? Okay, so I'm not going to go too much into what they are, right? So the reasoning behind all that is probably on this slide, because we all know about the breaches that happen. They happen pretty much daily. We read about them in the media. And we did a little bit of research. What we found, we found some commonality in what's happening in those breaches. What is common right now is that usually all the breaches begin with the outsiders, with the perpetrators of the breach, becoming the insiders within the organization, and then leveraging that inside access to get to where they're going and to try to compromise the data they are looking for, compromise the systems they are looking for. So a lot of, I would say, a vast majority of the attacks, they leverage use of the privileged accounts, and the privileged accounts, the use of privileged accounts, or rather misuse of them, have been traced to about 80% of all the breaches that have been investigated by several incident response companies. So that's kind of a list of people that we talked to sum up their experience on the remediation side. And there are several quite important points that the incident responders had come up with. Those points are, first of all, everybody is a target. There is a lot of thinking in some of the organizations that they are too small or present little or no value for attackers to become a victim of a breach. And what usually happens is probably if you don't have anything of value, or if you don't have anything of value, then you're probably either going out of business or out of business already. The companies exist to produce value, and that value is either bought on the open market through the sales process or acquired through other means. So this is really one of the takeaways. I'm sure everybody heard about an HVAC company that was servicing a Target store. They probably never thought of themselves being of such a high value target to be causing a very large security breach. The other finding is most likely than not, they will get it. And in the several presentations here at the BSides, we've talked about the phishing attacks, the malware exploits. It used to be maybe like 10 years ago that the attackers would try to get through the perimeter defenses, right? They'll DOS something, and then they'll get in, and then there will be party afterwards, right? Right now, in order to get in, this is no longer necessarily the avenue. The phishing attacks can target 1,000 employees of the organization, and it only takes one of them to click on the link, right? And chances are that somebody who is tired, somebody who is working from home and dealing with their spouse and the kids, and getting an email purportedly from their manager asking to review something, they'll click it, okay? Once they click it, they will be, the attackers will be in. And, you know, again, it's not so much a, well, whether it happens or not, it's pretty much going to happen. So the battleground here shifts a little bit to the assumptions that they are in. And once they're in, you need to be thinking about what is that you're going to do about them being in. The third takeaway from the responders is that they see that the attackers can linger within the compromised organization for quite some time. All right? It largely depends on their motivation. You know, if they're after the money, if they're after credit cards, whatever, they're probably going to get a quick hit and then extricate themselves together with the loot. If they're about something else, they might stay and linger for extended period of time, sometimes years. While they're lingering, they gather intelligence on the network, on the architecture, on the security tools, on the communications, on the personnel, et cetera, et cetera. So once they get to the point where they want to be, they can strike and get out. The fourth point is that access to privilege becomes really important in those attacks. And again, I've heard it in several talks here. Once they got the admin, once they are root, pretty much game over. And that's really the point here, okay? The systems are designed for the admins, for the privileged users, to be able to do pretty much anything. If the system has controls on those privileged users, those same privileged users can override the controls and reconfigure them the way that they want. So from the point of attacker, the privileged account is access to the privilege is really kind of is one of the supreme goals of what to get to once they are inside. And you know, there are a whole bunch of things what it can be likened to. So pick the one that you want. And another topic is not a lot of companies know what those privileged accounts are, where they reside, what is their function. What we found through research is there are actually 3 to 4 times privileged accounts within the organizations as there are employees. And we'll talk a little bit later about where to look for those things, right? But you know, it's a fairly hard realization, because what it means is that the attack surface the privileged accounts present is fairly large. And lastly, the attacks themselves are growing more and more sophisticated. Again, about 10 years ago, there would be an exploit of some vulnerability, something crashes, code gets installed, and everybody parties, right? At this point, what we see is much less straightforward things are starting to get exploited, such as the accounts that are run, that your services are using in order to run within the systems. The Active Directory-based attacks, and Does anybody in the audience have a Samsung TV at home? A Samsung TV.
Samsung.
Yes. So that's another emergent threat. It's kind of an example of that emergent threat, because it was recently discovered that Samsung TVs listen to what people are saying. It's part of their voice recognition, voice command feature, and actually send it to mothership to analyze. Well, guess what it means. If anybody is on your network, they can also listen to what you're saying. That's a fairly interesting avenue of exploitation. There is a worm that's been created that tries to hack DVRs. So the DVRs are used to mine bitcoins. And the more connected devices that consumers and the organizations get, the broader attack surface it becomes from the things that you may not necessarily suspect. All right? So where those privileged accounts are located. I mean, there are very obvious things, your desktop, your laptops, your databases, right? But then we are going into a little bit less obvious things. It's your social media accounts. Usually modern companies have presence online. They have Facebook page. How's access to update that is controlled? They have Twitter accounts. Has anybody heard about some tweets about unfortunate incidents in the White House that sent the Dow Jones plunging a few hundred points until everybody figured, oh, it's AP Twitter got hacked. There are security devices. There are industrial control devices, things that control the water system, things that control your electricity flow. More and more of them are controlled remotely. And just as any other IT systems, those systems have privileged accounts that are used to control what the systems do and how they should be doing it. So, altogether, this presents a very broad attack surface, much broader than a lot of organizations recognize. And essentially, the privileged accounts, those who control privileged accounts, really control the information systems. It could be the internal IT organizations. It could also be the external attackers. It could be internal attackers. So that really presents a new battleground for the information security, right? As we have seen that about 90% of the organizations had been breached, I would say probably the 10% are oblivious. We are getting into the point that we can't really stop much at the perimeter. Doesn't mean that we are supposed to stop trying, right? I'm not advocating to drop all the firewalls and just throw them into the garbage, right? But the effectiveness of those tools is really diminishing with the time. So because of that, the information security focus is now switching into the network rather than on keeping bad guys from the outside. And the regulators are also take notice, and that is probably going to motivate some of the organizations that are much less security focused and much more compliance focused. And those two terms are not necessarily the same. From what I know, privileged account controls around the privileged accounts are already part of the PCI requirements. I think the industrial control systems need to comply with those controls as well. I'm not necessarily a very big compliance person, but I'm sure several regulations can be named where this is really a requirement. And that brings us to the next point. Whether we are dealing with the external threats that are trying to get in, or we are dealing with internal threats, such as disgruntled employees, incompetent employees, or combination of thereof, these threats kind of merged into one avenue in a life cycle, where the attackers gain access inside the network, escalate their privileges. That in turn allow them to look inside the network, inside the host, find additional things to compromise, move laterally, gain more privilege, up to the point when they can exfiltrate their target and get out. So our privileged account compromise can really be considered a flashpoint, sort of a big bang on where the attack, in the attack life cycles, a part where the malicious presence within the network accelerates dramatically. And as we mentioned, those accounts pretty much control all the IT infrastructure, whether it's on-premise, in the cloud, with the industrial control, the phones, laptops that the employees carry. And it's all good and well when it is controlled by the organizations. However, once the compromise is reached, the attackers can reconfigure the existing controls, that will in turn allow them to bypass the defenses that internal IT security brought up. The normal operations of the network will be disrupted. And in some cases, again, if we're talking about industrial control or SCADA devices, it can also cause physical damage. So with that in mind, we've been, there is fairly good consensus within the industry. Well, I would say there's a pretty good spectrum on the industry of the point solutions. There are quite a few network security products that will do a very good job at protecting the network, your endpoints, the applications, the data itself, right? However, across all stacks, there is a need for a privileged account security, either solution or a concept, okay, that controls access throughout the entire stack, as the problem kind of transcends the technology. So what we're going to do now is actually talk about a few real-life hacks. And a lot of the information that I'm going to be talking about is in the public sources, so you can cross-check and see if I've been honest. Okay, if I am not, let me know. So we're going to be talking about Sands Resort and Casino. They have basically two sites. A smaller one in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Larger one in Las Vegas. The events I'm going to be talking about happened in beginning of 2013, I believe, or 2014. And they started with a brute force attack on the VPN system. So the existing security systems detected those. And the attacks, while they were kind of overwhelming the alerting mechanism, they did not really trigger a lot of response because there was a two-factor authentication solution deployed. So the admins were not very much worried about somebody brute forcing access into the network. So the attacks started on January 8th. Then the attackers returned on 21st and 26th. It didn't really get very far. So everything was fine until on February 1st, they found a test web server that was used to stage files before they go into the production website. So the attackers were able to get into that. And that gave them access into the Bethlehem network. However, the Bethlehem network was not really their target. So they kind of sat around. They expanded their presence within the network, waiting for the right time to strike. And the right time to strike came on February 9th, when a system engineer traveling from Las Vegas to Pennsylvania logs into his computer on the Bethlehem network. So his credentials are captured and cracked using mimikatz, and right away, the attackers have access to to Las Vegas. Once they're in Las Vegas network, they start spreading around, spreading their presence to the servers. They are starting to put malware on the machines. And the machines all of a sudden start rebooting on their own. The data starts disappearing. The employees start calling their help desk. That creates a bit of a chaotic situation. So everybody is trying to figure out what is going on. In the meantime, while everybody is trying to figure out why the laptops are not working, why nobody can do their job, the attackers are exfiltrating the data, the credit card, the contact information, social security numbers, not. The next thing, the IT security finds that, and they decided, well, there is no way we can really do much. The entire network is disconnected from the internet. That means the website is down, the hotel reservation system is not operational, there is a fairly serious business-facing damage going on. The attackers are no longer there, but they return they return the next day, just, I don't know, maybe because they can, to deface the website. Kind of icing on the cake. So, and again, here we have a fairly central usage of that privilege, of the privileged account, right in here. So as soon as the attackers were able to get to their privilege, that gave them access to the Las Vegas network, pretty much everything was done for. One thing that prevented the further spread of the attack was actually that one of the first systems hit with the malware that wipes all the information was a domain controller. And that cut off all the remote access points to other networks that SANS has, such as Singapore, et cetera. So that's what happened at SANS. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Anunak. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, did they stick with the senior developer account, or did they end up just pilfering all of the accounts?
So the senior system engineer account was their way in.
Repeat the question.
So the question was whether the attackers stuck with the senior system engineer's credentials, or they kept expanding their presence. And the answer to that is that credentials itself let them in.
Yep.
But that's not the only credentials that have been compromised, because with the domain admin access, you can pretty much, you can either get or reset.
Oh, so that was a domain
Yeah,
admin. Oh, okay.
that's basically, that's what let them through. Now, it doesn't have to be,
No.
because as soon as you get access to your machine, you can start harvesting your hashes, and then you spread, okay? So I want to talk a little bit more about the financially motivated attack. There has been some news about Anunak crime ring, which targeted several banks in Russia, Eastern Europe, and they were able to exfiltrate quite a lot of money from those banks. So to understand a little bit what they did, let me talk a little bit more about the history of the gang. So the gang started as they started as a group that targets individual users, and they started with pilfering individual users' bank accounts. That kind of gave them access to maybe a few hundred to a few $1,000s per hit. You know, it was kind of working. However, that's not a lot of money. So they regrouped, they formed a different group, and then they went after the banks. And the way that they went after the banks is they started targeting the personnel with phishing emails. And at the end of that phishing campaign, they were able to compromise a tech support user. So tech support users, you know, they reset people's credentials. They have fairly limited access, but they still have some. What that allowed them to do is gain administrative assistance, administrative access to a server with that tech support user. The access of the single server allowed them to leverage it to get the main admin credentials. With the main address credentials, they could hijack access to the domain controllers and compromise all the domain accounts. Well, guess what that domain controller used to control? That domain controller controlled 52 ATM machines. So for those who may not be familiar with ATM machines, a lot of ATM machines are really Windows machines. So they have exactly the same protocol. They use exactly the same protocols. They probably run only one program, the one that counts and dispenses money, right? But at the end of the day, it's still a Windows machine that is that can be joined to a domain, that has the registry, and that can be controlled through group policy. With access to domain controller, the attackers were able to control those ATM machines. And with control of the ATM machines, they were able to command those machines to dispense money when the accomplice is in the vicinity of the machine to collect. That's cash right there. So that was pretty cool, right? You know, you got some money, you got some cash, but that was not necessarily all. With access to the domain controllers, now the attackers could compromise the email system and check the workflows of the bank. They also could monitor the communication of the IT security and kind of stay one step ahead of them, trying to combat the infestation of the network. They were able to hijack credentials of the banking system admins. And what that means is now they could transfer money electronically to the bank accounts they control, to the e-currency, bitcoins, prepaid SIM cards, pretty much the places where you can't really get them out of. And with that mode of operation, the attackers were able to hit actually several banks, not just one. This description, I think, was detailed by Kaspersky, who was brought in by one of those banks to actually investigate what happened and see what's going on. But again, what we are seeing here, a fairly classic self-repeating cycle of getting the privilege, using the privilege to move around, escalating the privileges further, and then leverage the privilege to get to what the attackers really want. So what it all means is together with the existing security control, with the application security, the firewalls, the IDSs, IPSs, perimeter, web gateways, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With the security monitoring tools that would alert admins of something happening, the privileged account security really takes center place in preventing the attacks that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And with that, going back to the report that our researchers did with the incident responders, there are several takeaways that those incident responders were able to recommend, kind of right here. So it starts with creating an inventory of the privileged accounts, making sure that the organization knows the scope of the problem, monitoring of the privileged accounts, make sure that the credentials to those privileged accounts are securely stored and regularly changed after each use. You know, obviously, patching has a lot to do with keeping the system secure, and just practice your classic defense in depth by implementing a layer of privileged account security within the organization. Questions? Hope I didn't bore everybody to death. Go ahead.
Can you comment on service accounts? Service accounts are often run with, say, domain admin privileges, and they don't actually have a person associated with it. They just go there. And
Exactly.
Accounts don't usually change because if the password expires, you have to reset everything. How would you deal with a service account?
So that is something that can be scripted. I mean, I'm trying not to do a sales pitch here. So that can be scripted. So once the accounts themselves are changed, all the systems that use it are updated. What we have, I mean, what's important in that scenario is to actually keep a good inventory of where those accounts are used, so you don't forget something important and do not cause an outage. I believe in the latest Windows 2012, you can set the account up so it changes automatically. That Active Directory takes care of that. I haven't really worked with that, but that's another option.
Can you leave the recommendations slide up while you take questions?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure. More questions? Go ahead.
So at the end there it says practice classic defense in depth and implement a layer of protection around privilege. Can you give an example of a layer of protection around privilege?
So I'm very biased about what kind of layer of protection there should be. You know, I would say a system like the one I am biased towards would be a good one. But you know, you can do something homegrown, I guess. There are several other, you know, competitors, I guess, that do similar stuff. But you know, what you really need to be concerned about is that the system is probably going to do all that for you. All right. So go ahead. I'll get to you next.
The breaches that you mentioned earlier, would they have been possible if two-factor auth had been in use?
So two-factor authentication is good for personal accounts. Okay. When you have a shared account, like the one the service is using, how do you put a two-factor authentication onto that? The other thing, you know, again, if we're going back to Windows, two-factor authentication gets you to create a security token, right? Once it's created, you're still vulnerable to pass the hash, because the hash is created. You don't want, for every single use of that account, which if you take a look at, for example, procmon, happens with a frequency of a few milliseconds. You don't want the users to be entering that second factor, right? And just because, so that alone is probably not going to be enough. It will help users to it will prevent attackers from getting the token. But once they have it, they're good to go. Go ahead.
So I would add to that list also perform regular baselining of your privileged groups. Like if you have a group of users that has special permissions, you want to regularly audit those to make sure like there's no one in there that shouldn't.
Great comment. And again, to add to that, the classic privileged account security, privileged identity management problem started around the userless account, the personless account. Like, can anybody name who is root? Does root have a first name, last name, date of birth, social security number? Can root be fired? Probably not, right? However, it kind of expands further into the individual accounts that users are now using to administer the system. Your A- accounts on Windows side, your unlimited sudo accounts on the Unix side, etc. And that's where the groups are really important. Go ahead.
You may have just kind of answered this, but you mentioned that there was 3 to 4 times the number of privileged accounts as users. Do you find that that's, or employees, do you find that's a lot of ex-employee leftover accounts or service accounts?
A lot of that is that, but let's say myself. I have my laptop, right? There are services running on my laptop on the different identities. I have a phone, right, that runs company-issued applications.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
You know what I mean? So that's where it is. Go ahead.
To what extent do you think some of the threats can be mitigated by separating internal networks, firewalling them off, and sort of treating internal networks as if they were external?
So you can treat your internal network as if they were internal, but at the end of the day, where does, for example, your financial transactions live? Right? Where is access to your banking lives? Where is the list of your customers? Right? Where are the credit card numbers that are used to transact business? They can't really be completely air-gapped, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to run a website, and the website needs to process credit card transactions. So there is a path. So I would say probably strictly reliant on the perimeter/firewalling control. I don't think it's going to be. It's not going to be sufficient. And if it is, probably it's going to be way too expensive for its own good. More questions? Go ahead.
One recommendation I've heard is to limit the internet access of those using privileged accounts. It's not on the list, obviously. Do you think that's effective?
So it could be effective. The problem is it could be very hard to implement. You know what I mean? A lot of organizations give local admin rights to the users of their endpoints. Just because you can't call an IT person every time somebody needs to do X, Y, or Z, right? Do you want to limit the internet access from every laptop in the organization? I don't think the business will take this. So it's a good idea, right? It's probably going to be very hard to implement. Go ahead.
One part I don't understand is why it is so easy to hack these passwords out of Windows. Do you think that they are just all bad in auditing their AD, or is it a fundamental problem of Microsoft that nobody can fix? Or
so I don't necessarily want to concentrate on Windows in this. First of all, when you have, 30, 40,000 devices on your network, right? Each one of those devices has a super admin account, right? And I'm not even talking about the business applications that run and connect to the database with some kind of credentials, right? That will probably be very hard to change because God knows what is going to break. Each of those devices has different layers of security around those around the credentials. So in Windows, there is just the way the Kerberos was implemented, for example, right? It leaves hash as something that works off of, that the Kerberos tickets are created with. You know, there's nothing you can do about that. However, if you have 100 Unix servers, and because the privileged account security was not implemented, every one of them is using the same root account, that's not much different, right? And misconfiguration of one will allow you to read the shadow file, and then you crack it, and game over, right? So I wouldn't necessarily pick on Windows here. Anybody else? All right. I guess that's it. Thanks, everybody. And again, just to mention, CyberArk is hiring. If you are looking for a job, let me know. Here's a gentleman named Russ. He will also be happy to talk to you about this.